All right, part 2 of Bush and Clinton here. Obviously, we're talking about Clinton because that's part 2. So, more domestic policy stuff for Bill Clinton. Don't ask, don't tell. Okay, Clinton fought to ensure that gays had the right to serve in the military, but it was a fight, and eventually they compromised on what we call don't ask, don't tell, which means at this point it will be the first time ever that gay people are allowed to serve in the military. However, no one can ever find out that you were gay, right? So the military was not allowed to ask you if you were gay, but you weren't allowed to tell anyone that you were gay. If anyone found out, you would be forced out of the military. So I'm sure, obviously, just understand statistics and human nature. Plenty of gay people fought for America before that, but this is the first time where they said, hey, we'd like to have more gay people in the military, but no one can ever know. That has changed, right? There's zero correlation between your sexual preference and how you fight in a war, but that lasts for a while. Don't ask, don't tell lasts, I believe, all the way till the Obama administration. President Clinton will sign the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, a lot of people call it. Signed into law in 1996. This will legally define marriage as between a man and a woman for federal law purposes. It will allow states to refuse to recognize same-sex marriages or same-sex partnerships. That lasts all the way until the Supreme Court overturns it in the early 2010s. We'll talk about that with the Obama administration as well, because it happens under his administration. Healthcare. President Clinton attempted to overhaul the healthcare system in America and move it closer towards full coverage. He wanted people to have affordable healthcare insurance. He did not want universal healthcare. He wasn't trying to push us towards a European model. He was trying to push us more towards a Obamacare model, probably. So they want affordable healthcare insurance. Powerful lobbyists feared that it would become single payer. His centrist policy on it ends up being the worst elements of all of that. And to make it worse, he's going to put Hillary in charge. And that's not to say that Hillary Clinton isn't herself a smart person, despite all the other baggage she has. She's not dumb. But she isn't an expert on healthcare, and she was not an elected official, right? Rightfully so. People would be angry if President Trump put First Lady Melania Trump in charge of reforming healthcare, right? Melania Trump, I don't think she's an idiot or anything like that, but she has zero experience in this. We didn't elect her to do anything like that. Just focus on your other stuff. So, the same sort of thing happens. People were angry about it. They will do a lot of the debates and talking about it and planning things out in secret, which also was stupid. And so it really had no chance to pass, right? Republicans were very much against the plan. It's going to ultimately fail. We will get 2 positives out of this gigantic quagmire of ridiculousness. The final healthcare proposal that they put out, this whole committee put out, was like 1,500 pages long, and it was all bad. But we do get HIPAA protections, which protect your health information, right? So people cannot just release it and sell it or do whatever they want with it. They can't talk about it. So like if I've got one of my best friends, John's a doctor, he can't tell me about his patients because their information is protected. Other big thing is we got CHIP, the Child's Health Insurance Program for low-income children to get health care. A lot of kids I've taught throughout the years have been on CHIP, so it ends up being a positive. Minimum wage gets raised under the Clinton administration to a big $5.15 an hour. Federal minimum wage now is $7.45, I think, $7.50. Colorado's is higher. It kind of goes on a state-by-state thing. There's a push to raise the minimum wage to $15. We'll see what happens with that. All right, Hillary Clinton's health care plan, Health Security Now. You can see her up there talking. But, like I said, that never came to pass. So, Clinton's biggest domestic failure was his failure to reform what? A, healthcare, B, immigration, C, welfare, or D, the stock market. All right, the economy. President Clinton had a very famous saying that he actually had printed out and hung on the wall of the Oval Office, or I remember he had it on his desk in the Oval Office. And this was called, the phrase said, "It's the economy, stupid." So the basic idea was if the economy gets better, then he is going to win re-election. Which basically every president has followed that same playbook because America, by and large, votes based on the economy. So NAFTA is part of that, which we already talked about. He will reduce the deficit by cutting spending and raising taxes on the top 1.2% of Americans. So he will cut a lot out of social programs, specifically welfare. He's going to cut a lot out of welfare and SNAP and WIC benefits. And he will raise taxes on the very richest of Americans, although very modestly. Remember, going into this whole period of time, right, going into the Reagan administration, the top 1.2% of Americans were taxed at least 70%. right? After Reagan leaves, it's in the 40s. Bush won't touch it, so I'll raise it slightly. Remember, that was a big part of it. He'll raise it slightly. Clinton will raise it slightly, but it'll still stay in the 40s. So it really isn't like a huge tax raise on the richest Americans. Anyways, he's generally considered a solid economic president by broad numbers, right? A lot of jobs created, unemployment goes down, we have a budget surplus for the first time in a while, and poverty is going to go down. But all these benefits will be unevenly distributed, and I'll show you that chart again here in a second so I can get mad again. The dot-com bubble will burst. This will be the first time that we have a big part of our economy based on the internet, and we will overvalue a lot of those internet sites. And that bubble will eventually burst, and the economy will get worse. But that's right after Clinton leaves, when second Bush comes into office. Clinton will continue to deregulate things, including, and most famously, helping or not refusing to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act. Okay, he was in favor of repealing it, and it will be a big issue. Okay, the Glass-Steagall Act was passed during the Great Depression, and what it did is it separated commercial and investment banking. Right, so what that meant was you could not go to a bank and have both your regular retirement stuff and your regular savings account and your stock market portfolio, because those banks during the Great Depression were taking people's money and playing the stock market. Right, so we separated those two types of banks. Right, we had savings and loans banks and we had investment banks. Repealing that allowed them to come back together, and we saw what happened when we put them back together with the 2008 financial crisis, where banks were playing with people's money and making risky investments, weren't having the same regulations on mortgage lending and stuff like that, and it's all going to fall apart. There has been a push to reinstitute Glass-Steagall, but that hasn't gone anywhere. Anyways, here's NAFTA being signed into law, and you can see there on the left was the preliminary agreement. So you can see President Bush is in that one. On the right, you can see it's President Clinton signing the final agreement. So NAFTA increased our GDP, but we lost jobs overseas and workers' income stagnated here at home. Is that true? Is that false? Back to this chart that makes me super angry. In fact, I added a second chart to make me angry as well, so I'll step in here again. So we talked about how the blue bars were us regular Americans, the bottom 90%, the vast, vast, vast majority of Americans, right? 300 of our 330 million Americans, that's the blue column. The red column is the top 10%, so the 30 million richest Americans, right? This chart shows us is who gets the money, who gets the income growth during this time period, right? So during the 70s, right, it was a 55 to 45 proposition. That 55% of all the average income growth was going to go to us regular people and 45% to the very rich. You can see that flip during the Reagan years, where it becomes 80% go to the rich and 20% to the rest of us. The Clinton years will only be slightly better for the bottom 90%, where it's a 75-25 proposition. You can see here, we're looking specifically from this and forward. There's the top 1%, so it goes from about right here to about right there during the Clinton administration. The top 1%, you can see their average household income went up by $500 million, or $500,000, right? It goes from $500,000, so here's $1 million, it goes up to $1.5 million. That was their average household income before taxes that's how much it grew during the Clinton administration. Here's the rest of us. Oh, look at our lives. All the way there at the bottom. So this is the bottom 80% of Americans. That's most of us, right? That's most of us. Where the top goes exploding upwards, the top 20% goes up, but the bottom 80, the rest of us stays exactly the same. That's why I get super angry talking about modern presidents, because despite any party affiliation, neither of them, when it comes down to it here, has really made our lives any better economically. So, Clinton continued the deregulatory policies of his predecessors, Carter, Reagan, and Bush, including repealing what law? Was it A, the Fair Housing Act, B, the Glass-Steagall Act, C, the National Tariff Act, or D, the Environmental Protection Act? All right, foreign policy. Clinton's foreign policy record was muddled compared to his economic record. I'll just go and say it's not very good. Right? I was probably trying to sound nice here. Some okay things, some really bad things, right? So, we had some missteps in Somalia, Rwanda, and Haiti. And missteps is a really crappy way for me to put this, especially when we talk about Rwanda. So, in Somalia, we had a peacekeeping force there, right? There was an incident, the Black Hawk Down incident, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail when we get to the war on terror stuff. But most Somalis didn't particularly love our presence there or other UN presences, so we got into a firefight and will immediately withdraw. With that still in mind, in the country of Rwanda will be one of the worst genocides ever committed in world history. Hundreds of thousands of people killed within a month due to fighting between the two ethnic groups of that country, the Hutus and the Tutsis. We and the rest of the world were very slow to help, right? We waited too long to intervene, and hundreds of thousands of people died as a result for that. In Haiti, we tried and failed to oust the dictator of that country. Former President Carter was able to step in and lead negotiations, eventually getting that leader to step down. We also kind of raided some of their treasury. He would enlarge NATO, right? So remember, NATO was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that we created right after World War II, right at the beginning of the Cold War, to unite Western democracy against the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed during President Bush's presidency, right? So a lot of those countries that are part of the Soviet Union are now independent countries. We promised Russia we would not add them to NATO, but then we did anyways. The Oslo Accords, okay? This is a positive, right? Although it hasn't really gone the way that a lot of people hoped when this happened, but Israel and Palestine, which we talked about a ways back with the Holocaust lecture, that's always been a very controversial area, okay? So Israel has its own government. The Palestinians have what we call the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They eventually came to an agreement for what they call the two-state solution. This is still America's official position, although we are undermining it as well. And what the two-state solution meant was there would be an independent Israel and an independent Palestine. Two equal countries next to each other, theoretically with their own unique political structures and military and all that sort of stuff. That has never happened. In fact, Israel has taken more and more land, claiming that it should be theirs. Palestinians have less and less. There has been terror activities on both sides. So we're not really on this path anymore. And to be honest, maybe it was a little pie in the sky because I don't think that Israel would want an independent Palestine next to them with its own military and stuff like that, so that might not have ever been a possible thing. What I think is the best solution would be a one-state solution with equal representation where everybody gets a vote and stuff like that, and we get away from the occupied zones and the walls and the segregated communities and the near apartheid-like conditions in some parts of Israel. I think if we could push towards that, that would be great, but that's very, very, very hard politically to have happen. So we'll move on from that. There'll be a war in the Balkans. There used to be a country called Yugoslavia. Right? Yugoslavia will fall apart and break into a whole bunch of smaller countries like Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, and Macedonia. When that happens, there will also be a war between Serbia and Bosnia. And it was completely over religious and ethnic conflicts. Serbia, mostly Orthodox Christian. Bosnia has a lot of Muslims in it. There will be ethnic cleansing and war crimes, most of them done by Serbians against Bosnians. NATO, under the United States direction, will intervene and help bring the war to a close. Sometimes very nicely, sometimes not so nicely. I had friends that grew up in both Serbia and Bosnia. And they can tell you some of the bad things that America did there and some of the good things. But overall, we get involved because we are afraid another Rwanda is going to happen. And we stop it short of being as bad. So it's probably a positive, right? So here is the Oslo Accords. Okay, Israel and Palestinian Liberation Organization signing an agreement, shaking hands, would have thought to be completely unthinkable years before. Rwanda here on the left, right? Then on the right, what happened in the Balkans. Terrorism. Okay, terrorism is going to, or I should say terrorism can start. We've had terrorism for as long as there's been organized society, but what we consider now terrorism, right? Generally involving extremists of the Islamic faith, or people that pervert that faith, I should say, to fit their extremist goals. That really starts in earnest during the Clinton administration, where there'll be attacks against us. So the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia we talked about briefly earlier. We'll talk about more when we get to the war on terror. But the World Trade Center will be attacked during the Clinton years in 1993, about a year into the job. Al-Qaeda, although it wasn't technically Al-Qaeda now, but under the direction of Osama bin Laden, A bomb was filled with, a van was filled with bombs and parked in the basement garage of the World Trade Center. I'll show you a picture here in a second that kind of explains that, but the World Trade Center, these two gigantic buildings, more than 100 stories tall, that were the symbols of American economic might. All the parking was underneath. Okay? In New York City, there's not a lot of places to park. So a lot of the parking garages are underneath the buildings that are there. So they filled up a bomb with explosives. They parked it next to a pillar underneath the World Trade Center. It exploded. It caused a lot of damage, and some people did die, but it did not bring down the buildings. Later on in the 90s, there will be bombings in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, of U.S. embassies. And the USS Cole will be bombed off of Yemen. So there'll be a question here towards the end of the Clinton years. Did he do enough to combat Al-Qaeda? And we always do enough when it comes to terms of bombing. Like we shot rockets at them and did stuff like that. What there probably wasn't enough was detailed analysis of information raised by the CIA or other intelligence agencies. And we didn't particularly use any of that information the right way, and we could make the same complaints about the Bush administration and the Obama administration and probably the Trump administration once we get all the news. So, yeah. Anyways, we're going to do a whole day on the War on Terror, so I'll save all my yelling for that day. We'll have one of the worst incidences of domestic terror in American history with the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, two white nationalists, will bomb the Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City, and 168 people will die. We'll talk a little bit more about this here in a second when I get to the pictures. So here's the World Trade Center bombing. On the left, you can see this New York Times headline. Right in the middle of that shows the buildings, and underneath there were 5 or 6 layers of levels of parking garages. They parked the van, I can't remember on what level in there, but it exploded. On the right is what you see, right? On the right is what you see. The explosion happens, messes up the garage. 5 people will die, but it does not bring the towers down. Some of the embassy bombings, okay, in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which countries they border each other in Africa. You can see the bombings that occurred there. Again, we'll focus a lot more on this stuff when we talk about war on terror. So, high-profile bombings and attacks against the United States during the Clinton years included what? A, the World Trade Center. B, African embassies. C, the USS Cole. Or D, all of the above. All right, the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay, so on the left, that's what the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building looked like before the car bomb exploded. On the right is what it looked like afterwards. So Timothy McVeigh loads up a U-Haul with explosives, and he parks it right in front of the building, walks away, sets the detonator, it explodes. 168 people died, including a lot of children, because on the first floor, right in front of where he parked the damn van, was where they had the daycare for all the people who worked there. So, why does Timothy McVeigh do it? Well, we have an issue with separatist groups and white supremacist groups in America. We've always had issues with both, but we like to pretend like they're not as bad now, but they're still quite bad and quite scary. In the early 1990s, things got particularly bad due to 2 incidences and then this, right? The first one was at a place called Ruby Ridge. At Ruby Ridge, there was a family living there. The husband of which, or the whole family were separatists, which means they didn't believe in the American government. We shouldn't have a federal government. The federal government's bad. It should be destroyed. But for the most part, separatists stay away, right? They separate. They also, though, tend to also be white nationalists. There tends to be a lot of overlap between groups like the Klan, right, who hate all minorities and hate Jewish people and hate stuff like that, and these separatist groups. In Ruby Ridge, okay, the man, his name is escaping me, so I'm going to Google it while I'm telling the story because it's going to bother me that I can't think of his name. But the husband of the family, the guy who led them to live in Ruby Ridge. Ruby Ridge is in northern Idaho, where we have issues with white supremacist groups. They went to a church, right, that was both separatist and sort of white supremacist. At this church, there was an FBI informant, and he convinced the husband here, Randy Weaver, there's his name, convinced Randy Weaver to sell a sawed-off shotgun to another FBI informant, right? Sawed-off shotguns are illegal because it's illegal to modify weapons in that way. So they bring him in, they try to get him to flip and inform on the other people in this separatist group that he's a part of. He refuses to do that. So they charge him with the crime. he jumps bail and goes back to his house with his wife and his kids and wants to stay away, doesn't want to, get indicted for that crime, doesn't want to do time, doesn't want to help the government in any way. So the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms group, right, it's part of our law enforcement community, they go to get him, a shootout occurs, and an ATF agent will get killed. The FBI comes in, FBI sniper, in that ATF standoff, they kill one of his kids, one of Weaver's kids. The FBI comes in, it's sniper, shooting at Weaver, gets him a couple of times but misses and accidentally shoots his wife in the face, so she dies as well. After that, everything explodes, right? A lot of separatist groups are there protesting, yelling at the FBI, yelling at other law enforcement people that are there. Eventually, they are able to get Mr. Weaver, Randy Weaver, to leave the compound. He will serve some time for selling the illegally modified shotgun, but the government will have to pay him $3 million in damages for the killing of his wife and son. So that happens, right? The separatist group, the white nationalist groups in the country are now on a higher alert level, right? Because something just happened to members of their community. Add to that, a couple years later, what happens in Waco, Texas, where a separatist religious group called the Branch Davidians will build a compound. They, at this compound, don't want to be involved with really America, but the government especially. But at this compound, there are reports that the leader of this group in Waco, which again, David Koresh is his name. I just started watching another documentary on this. He was marrying children, right? He had a vision that only he should be with the women in an adult way. So he forced people to let him sleep with their wives, and he started marrying underage women, like 14-year-old girls. So the government kind of gets wind of this, and Child Protective Services kind of alerts the ATF, and the ATF, after all this Ruby Ridge stuff, decides that they need a win, right? So they're going to raid this compound in Waco. It does not go well. The Branch Davidians basically pour gasoline all over the place. It's going to be a huge fire. Almost everyone inside will die when the FBI and the ATF try to breach the outer walls. So these two big things happen, right? Where separatists die at the hands of the government. So people like Timothy McVeigh, who is in here right there, and his friend on the right, Terry Nichols, who helped him plan it, they decide that they need to strike out and they need to attack the government back. So that's what happens in Oklahoma City, right? This is on the left is a memorial of Oklahoma City. On the right, there's a great, great documentary on the Oklahoma City bombing, and you should watch it. It's on Netflix. Please watch it. Called Oklahoma City. So this white nationalist separatist movement explodes, literally, in Oklahoma City. We still have issues with it. Okay, a lot of militia groups that the FBI has consistently ranked as the #1 threat to Americans, even higher than like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. But it's something that we don't like to address a lot because issues of race and that sort of thing are hard to talk about, hard to address. But Oklahoma City will be one of the worst moments in that sort of thing. So how many people will die at the Oklahoma City bombing? Was it 115? That's A. B, 142. C, 168. Or D, 201. All right, now to the Clinton scandals. I got about 10 minutes left before I'd have to stop, so I'm going to try to get through it all in 10 minutes. President Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary, not always completely deserved, but will be in a lot of scandals. And they will deserve a very large amount of scorn. And I'll get to that here in a second. The one that doesn't really stick a lot and probably wasn't that big of a deal will be the Whitewater scandal, but that'll be the one that kind of is the launching off point for the rest. So, the Clintons were a super connected family in Arkansas, obviously. Governor and First Lady. Even before that, he was the Attorney General. Hillary, in her private life, had a very successful law firm. But they were close to a family called the McDougalls, who were engaged in a whole lot of very questionable or shady business dealings involving real estate on the Whitewater River in Arkansas. So Bill and Hillary will be investors in this real estate project. Eventually it all kind of falls apart, but the Clintons don't really lose very much money or any money, and so there's allegations that they were doing some gross stuff with this real estate transaction. A guy is put in charge, so this is when Clinton's president, right? They inform a special prosecutor, his name's Kenneth Starr, and he will lead the investigation looking into Whitewater. But when he can't find anything on Whitewater, he's going to go into basically every part of the Clintons' personal lives and try to find something to pin on them. So the Clintons will weather this storm. and no official charges will be filed against them. But this leads to the overwhelming feeling that a lot of people have. I mean, Hillary's her favorables were very, very low in 2016, where the Clintons are always kind of adjacent or next to some really skeezy looking stuff, right? But no wrongdoing, no charges ever filed against them for Whitewater. But through the Whitewater investigation, links them up to the Lewinsky scandal. Now, I'll take an aside here real quick. President Trump got looked into, right, for some Russia involvement or Ukraine, and there was investigations into that, and there was a special prosecutor. But you will note that in this time, right, Republicans fought very, very hard to make sure that the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, didn't stray too far from Russia or the Ukraine in his investigation. That was because back in the 90s, Kenneth Starr didn't really look at Whitewater for very long. He started looking into everything in the Clinton lives, and that's going to help get Clinton impeached, and Republicans didn't want that to happen now. So special prosecutors have been pretty common in American history. How much you want to participate with them varies, right? And I would argue that even a Democrat getting involved with a special prosecutor would stonewall it a lot more than they did back in the 90s. But I digress. So, while investigating claims of sexual assault by Paula Jones, okay, Bill Clinton is very much known as a womanizer, it is uncovered that President Clinton was having an affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky, right? So this has nothing to do with Whitewater, but during the Whitewater investigation, Kenneth Starr gets introduced to this woman named Paula Jones, who was accusing President Clinton of sexual assault. And through that, he eventually finds out about this affair, okay? It was not, so this whole thing with Monica Lewinsky, okay, I'm not going to justify very much of it. What I will say is that there was not a sexual assault, right? Monica Lewinsky was of age and was very much consenting to this affair. Now, that's the only real niceness I'll say about it, okay? There are a lot of very, very legitimate questions about whether or not she had the ability to consent, right? She was 23, 24. Bill Clinton was in his 40s, and he was the most powerful person on earth, and also her boss, right? So how much could she really consent or not consent there? But she does still to this day claim that was a consensual relationship, so we'll leave that as it is. Bill was accused by many women, credibly, of sexual assault, right, or misconduct, and Democrats will look the other way, even to this day, defending Clinton. But I will say that that is not a partisan issue, right? President Trump has been accused by a lot of women of sexual misconduct, and Republicans are staying by him. Just recently, Joe Biden has been accused of sexual misconduct, and Democrats are sticking with him. And really what it makes me feel is just overwhelming amounts of sadness that we still don't value women or their experiences very much. Anyways, back to this. President Clinton will deny their relationship under oath, but he'll eventually confess, so he eventually gets impeached for obstruction of justice and perjury. However, the Senate refuses to remove him from office. So very much like the Trump impeachment, President Trump got impeached, right? He'll always be known as a president that was impeached, but he was not removed. The same thing happens with Bill Clinton, right? The scandal will weaken the final 2 years of his presidency, and he'll kind of ride it out. So on the left, Deepwater, they're talking about the Whitewater investigation. The middle thing right there, Monica and Bill. On the right, there's Bill Clinton lying about his affair with Monica Lewinsky. So, true or false, Bill Clinton was impeached over the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So, legacy stuff. In the end here, okay, Bill Clinton will be the centerpiece of the new Democratic movement. Centrist policies and triangulation will lead to a further rightward shift in the Democratic Party and the alienation of huge parts of their coalition, most specifically the abandonment of middle and lower class or the working people of our country. Democrats thought they would win every election going forward because of demographic advantages. And to be quite frank, if you look at the popular vote totals since 1988, right, the Democrats have won the popular vote every election except for 1988 and 2006, right? They won the 2004. They did win the popular vote. Al Gore won more votes than did George Bush, right? He won the Electoral College. President Trump did not win more votes than Hillary Clinton did, but he won the Electoral College. That's the way we have it set up. So the Democrats believe that their number advantage, which has borne out to be true, would be enough to win basically every presidential election from there on out, so they can marginalize a lot of the people that they were supposed to be helping, right? They're going to choose to benefit college-educated white people over everyone else, over minorities or immigrants, over working class white people, over everybody else, right? So how did that bear out? Well, they cut welfare. They passed the crime bill. President Clinton himself will attack Sister Soldier and Jesse Jackson. So he'll attack civil rights people like Jesse Jackson. And he'll pass the 1999 immigration law, right? So they do move towards the right under the Clinton presidency. This does not work out long term, though, for the Democrats, at least not this far. He's emblematic of hyper-partisan politics. He wasn't really super liberal, but he's painted that way by conservatives. This is also the beginning of the cable news cycle where, Fox News has to fill 24 hours a day. So does CNN, so does MSNBC. And that's going to be filled a lot with just pure anger and people yelling on TV and convincing you to hate each other. He believed there was a vast right-wing conspiracy against him. Hillary Clinton has said that as well. And he'll further to push towards responsibility politics, which basically means your station in life was your responsibility. It wasn't the government's responsibility. Education is the only way up. That professional class values, more anti-union values were the way to go. I do believe you have a lot of responsibility in your life, but you also got to factor in where people are born and what they're born into. America doesn't have the social mobility that we like to pretend that we have. Okay? If you're born poor, most people die poor. And that's a failure of our government to not make it easier for people to change their social status. And that's not just a Clinton failure, that's an American failure. But anyways, as I said at the beginning of this unit, Reagan will inform everybody else. Clinton will be informed by Reagan. He'll take some Reagan ideas and mix them into his triangulation policy to remain popular and to pass laws. And a lot of other Democratic politicians will try to be more Clinton-y because Clinton-y is sort of the Democratic version of Reagan-y, right? So you'll see that a lot when we get to the Obama administration. None of this stuff is isolated, right? And we can't look at presidencies, we can't look at American history through the lens of Republican-Democrat, or conservative-liberal, because it doesn't really work that way. But we'll continue that next time as I talk about the second President Bush and President Obama, although I might decide to do War on Terror first. We'll see. Actually, I will do War on Terror. So the next time I talk to you, we're going to do War on Terror. But until then,